the first thing I do, nice thin screwdriver, make sure it goes in to each of the holes. As I said, I've had these things in the past which have had a manufacturing fault, and I'd rather find out now than in 500 miles time when the bloody thing has failed. So if I confirm that that's good, the next thing I do is just using some ordinary LM grease, stuff you pump into it in the first place, is just put a dabble in each of these. It's just over and above, sorry you can't see, it's just over and above the grease that they're supplied with. Gives them a fighting chance, and they're going to be pumped full of grease using a grease gun anyway. It also helps the needle rollers to stay in place, but when they're brand new, sorry you can't see again, when they're brand new they tend to be easier to put together. Where I've found there to be problems with these is if you start using hammers to hammer the joints together rather than pressing them together. As I say, you don't have 20-ton press, you can do it in a vise. Right, so let me get this assembled. So, a couple of observations. First of all, these circlips are handed. One edge is very slightly rounded, and the other edge is completely flat. You could probably see that in there. Because the circlips were greasy in the original instance, the impact is that if you put both on each plane in round side first, the joint is very tight. Only by a few thou, but even so, it makes the joint a bit tight. I have to take one apart and wonder why. There's always a reason why these joints are tight. If they are in any way tight or not, you can't wobble them around, then there's something wrong. And it's best to take it apart and understand really what the problem is. It could be, you see, that one of the pins has slipped out. In this particular case, it was tight because I hadn't realised the very, very slight roundness on one side. And that's what I was expecting, but I didn't notice it on the first set of clips. So perhaps the first set of clips I used were completely flat, and then just assumed that everything else was completely flat. Second observation, the bleed nipple doesn't always screw in that easily. So before you go to all the aggravation of building the bloody things up, make sure that the bleed nipple actually goes in. And this one's a bit tricky. I'll get that in before I go any further with that one. Right, so here, what I've effectively done, if you imagine that half is bolted up against the differential, it's helpful if you can access the bleed nipple without having to disconnect the prop shaft. So what I've done is I've pointed it towards or away from the actual prop shaft itself. I've located the joint inside the cup. So when pressing this thing together, what I've tried to do is to centralise the ram above the cup. I've had to put the packing piece at a slight angle. If you can see what's happening here is because the edges of the yoke, I've got a kind of ramp on them, but that particular part is flat. It just means that things aren't going to twist and turn. As you can see, as I'm pushing it down, I'm just pushing the spider down as well. It's kind of popping in. I think it's almost in. As you can see now, things are starting to move. So, next thing, let's take that off and put the other cup in. I've positioned the other cup now, and again, I'm just going to see if I can push this in gently. As you can see, I've located the spider in the lower cup. It's going down. Whoop. I don't know what that fucking was. That's obviously something that wasn't quite in alignment. Right, now, it's pushed both cups into a position where they will probably, and I can see that the thing has gone in a good way. I can slide, use a bit of excess grease coming out of the bleed nipple holder, I can slide it backwards and forwards. So what I need to do now is to push these end pieces in so that I can get the circlips in. Right. To push the cups in so I can get the circlips, what I've done is I've utilised a couple of nuts, and then as I pump the pressure, you can see the gap closing up, and effectively what you want is the gap here to be tight on both sides, but, and I'll go through this in a second, I'm not putting any real force. I mean, I know this is a 20-ton press, but there's no pressure on this at all. You don't really want pressure on it, you just want to be able to use the compression side of things. Right, okay, that's almost home, I think. And we'll just check the joint still turns, and it does. Right, let's have a look at that and see what that looks like. So just take the pressure off it and tip the nut out, which has gone on the floor, thank you gravity. And at the top here, if you focus, you can see that is just about clear off the groove, and on the other side is miles away. So what I'm going to do is fit one circlip and then compress the other side to fit the other circlip. So fitting the circlips itself, piece of piss. What I'd like to do, to save myself pain the next time, is just put a bit of grease in the groove. Do is put it that way up, and then take a circlip. I've got the circlip. I'll do this without, 1 minute. Try and do this so you can see. So squeeze the circlip, pop it in, and that is very clearly in the groove. Sometimes they can be a bit tight, and what I then use is a suitable drift, probably a socket of some kind that fits in there, not onto the end cap but onto the circlip, and give it a tap. Right, now let's do the other half of this. Line it up. Right, so we're lined up. I've used the press. There's a V in the press that allows me to mate the flat surface of the yoke against the side there, and I put a nut at the top, and the idea now is I am just going to push this down. It's moving the bottom cup tighter to the circlip, and now it's gone in, but I can't turn it. This isn't a disaster, don't worry about it. What I then do, because I've not gone nuts with that, I can now get the other circlip in. Yep, the other circlip can go in. So again, a little finger of grease in for the circlip itself, just to aid removal at some point in the future. Retrieve my circlip pliers, pick up another circlip if I can. Right, 1 second. God's sake. Right, okay, there we are. Circlip on pliers. These are internal circlip pliers, by the way. You get two different types. You get internal circlips and externals. You want ones where you squeeze the handle and the needles go closer together. Okay? If you don't get that type, then you'll find putting the circlip in is a bastard. Now, what's happened here is that it's gone in, but it's not gone down into the groove. Clamped it into the vise gently, drift in the form of a socket, a nylon hammer, and that was all it needed. Okay, right, so now we've got both circlips in, we still have the problem. Oh, it turns now. So I think what probably happened was that tap was enough just to get it to move. All I've done is mounted it in that position and tapped here. Just a sharp tap with the soft-faced hammer in both directions, and now what I've got is that half of the universal joint is in place with 2 circlips properly seated, and you can see that that's a job done. What we need to do now is to line it up with the other half of the shaft. Now, again, I said earlier on, when you're doing these, it helps if the universal joints are located in such a way that the bleed nipple is going to be in the same plane at both ends. Yeah? You understand what I mean? So let's put this one on, first of all. I'll line it up and I'll come back to you. So here we are, lined up. Fortunately, the flat surfaces on this half of the joint are flat. So it means that I just put a spacer in at the top there to save myself jacking this thing too far. And you can see the bottom cup is going down nicely. And when that gets level, which it pretty much is, put the other cup in. I'm going to lift this up and it goes in, and then I'm going to push down slowly. Any form of stiffness for now, then I will stop and find out why. But this is going on quite nicely. That's it. I don't want to go too far, so let me, if I release, I need to hold the prop shaft, that turns. So that's the end caps in line. The only thing I check at this point is that the yoke moves fully into each cup, and that would indicate that there's no needles in the way. So we'll get busy with the nuts again. I'll probably just use one nut this time rather than trying to press both in at the same time, and I'll push one down and then I will go around and push the other one down. So let me just line things up. They are all lined up, and I'm just going to push this down until I can see the groove, and you can see the nut going down into the cup there. Just needs to go a little bit further, I think. That could well be it. Right, so let's remove. It's actually gone just a little bit too far, but that's not a huge issue, because what I can do is I can put the circlip in and then push the cup back out and up against the circlip once I've finished. So let's grab hold of a circlip. We can pop him in. Riveting viewing, eh? There it goes. Right, I'm confident that is in, but there's a fair amount of gappage on the other side. So what I'll do is now I will push this one down. It will go into a correct location and push the other one out against the joblet. So let me put the circlip, I should say. Let me put the nut back in. So nut back in. Focus. Nuts back in. And we're just going to pump it now. You can see the yoke is actually moving down a little bit as well. Right, okay, that's almost certainly in because I've got about half a ton of pressure recorded. So let me pull that out and over to the bench. And yes, there's enough in there. You can see that the joint has gone together because it's pushing grease out. And that's one of the reasons I don't fit the bleed nipple until after this part of the process. So let's see if now we can get this fella in. Circlip pliers again. It's a bit fiddly one-handed, but not impossible. Oh, this one's right. Okay, so then circlip plier locates the clip into the groove, and you heard that clicking quite nicely then. Right, I'm fully anticipating this joint will be solid though, so actually let me find my hammer, which has been taken up. There it is. And then just give it a smart tap, rotate, and a smart tap, and now you see that joint now rotates on all its axes. Like that. One, I still need to put the bleed nipple in. There's bits of grease that have gone past the oil seals, but that's not a huge issue. I tend to just clean these up, so I need to put the bleed nipple in and then pump it full of grease. And you know when it's pumped full of grease, because grease will start coming out of one of the seals. Normally finds the weakest one, and that's one universal joint. What I do for the other end is I will build the other end up in exactly the same way as I've just done this one, but making sure that the bleed nipple location, because you notice it's not central in the yoke, points towards or away from in this case it will be away from the transfer box, so that I can get easy access when I want to bleed it. And also then, as I put it together, because this thing's on just a standard spline, make sure that it goes in and is on the same plane as that one. So I want it like that, if you get my drift. So the two yokes are exactly the same. That will go like that, and I want the bleed nipple to be pointing in this direction. Right, so let me do that and I'll show you the results. So I've built up both ends. I've fitted the two bleed nipples. There is another bleed nipple which needs to go onto the shaft here. I've fitted the shaft on so that lines up with that, that lines up with that. Fitted the gaiter. And just all that needs to happen now is there's a threaded ring goes on that end to keep the two halves of the prop shaft together, and then the gaiter goes over the top, and that's it. That's one prop shaft rebuilt. I need to kind of crack on with the other one now. Oh joy, wish me luck.